Hey guys, Mike here with EBR, and today we're checking out the Velotric Discover 1 Plus. It's a value-driven commuter e-bike that gets up to 28 miles an hour, got some really impressive range, and I found it to be pretty comfortable. So stick around, let's take a deeper look here at the Velotric Discover 1 Plus. All right, so the Velotric Discover 1 Plus, it is a class 3 commuter, so speeds up to 28 miles an hour in pedal assist, and it does have a throttle. The bike is UL 2271 certified on the battery, 2849 on the whole bike, and then they also went as far as ISO 4210 durability testing it. And so all three certifications are nice to see for safety and durability, especially at this lower price point. Now, when it comes to colors on this bike, they have 5 colors to pick from, which is also kind of unheard of at this price point. They've got a forest green, they've got a silver, an indigo gray, a mango kind of orange color, and then this one here is cayenne or cyan. I'm not really sure how you say that, but you can take a look and see for yourself. Now, when it comes to weight, we weighed this one we got for testing, and it weighed around 61 pounds. When we removed the battery, that weight went down to about 52 pounds, and the battery itself was around 8.8 pounds. Now, on the frame itself, it only comes in one size, and that fits riders from 5'1" all the way up to 6'4". Now, I'm 5'11", and I rode the bike quite a bit this week, and I found the bike to fit me just fine, although I don't know how it does at the really far ends of the spectrum. So if you are that 5'1" or that 6'4", I can't really speak for that area, but I think in the middle of the range, it's gonna do just fine. Now, the max payload on this bike is a pretty hefty 440 pounds, so you've got room for yourself, your gear, or if you're just a heavier rider and want a bike that can take a little bit more extra weight, this is a good option, especially at this price. Again, you'll probably hear me say that a few times because it's got a lot going on for its value. Now, when it comes to geometry on this one frame, this has a nice low 15-inch step over height, so it's really easy to get on and get off from either side without having to lean the bike and throw your leg over. So if you're worried about stability or things like that, this is a good feature to have. Now, the reach on it is currently 14.5 inches, but that reach will change based on how you adjust the stem. The stem is adjustable up to 60 degrees. Now, the wheelbase is 45 inches from front hub to rear hub or vice versa, and then you have about 8 inches of adjustability here in the seat post. So between the wide rider height range and then the adjustability in the seat post and the stem, you've got a lot to work with to kind of dial in a fit that works best for you. Now, when it comes to tires and wheels, they went with a 26-inch alloy wheel, and that is wrapped in a 26 by 2.5 inch commuter tire. Now, the tires have a pretty standard commuter tread pattern. It's kind of slick with some water seeping and traction lines for wet pavement and things like that. But all in all, they roll smooth, they roll quiet. But the branding on them is unbranded, so I don't know about longevity or reputation. But in the week I've been riding and the over 100-something miles I've put on it, they've done just fine. Now, when it comes to fenders, they do have front and back fenders, and they are plastic fenders, which, as Ben points out, our mechanics take. Alloy fenders, or excuse me, plastic fenders, just do a better job of taking everyday abuse without bending or really breaking. And they also tend to be quieter on the road because metal ones just rattle a little, have a tingy rattle to them, and plastic ones generally don't have that. And I found these to be in that group where they're not loud at all. So you do have fenders. Now, racks do not come with it, although I'll say right now the promotion, if you buy the bike, it does include a free rear rack and a rear view mirror. So those are included now with the purchase, but I don't know how long that lasts. It could be gone tomorrow, I have no idea. But if you decide to add your own stuff, they do have 3 mounting points. So you've got mounting points in the back for a rack, you've got a mounting point here for a water bottle cage, and you've got a mounting point up front for a front basket, which they do sell a front basket and some other like phone mount accessories, pretty typical accessories you find with e-bikes. Now, when it comes to lighting, we do have front and rear lighting. So the headlight up front is rated at 60 lux, and it's bright enough to be seen, which is really helpful for commuting. And it even provides enough light to kind of get some visibility in low light or dark situations. In the back, we have a wired-in tail light that, as a perk, also acts as a brake light when you hit your brake levers, which I always like to see, especially on a bike designed for commuting. There are no turn signals, and I'd like to ask for them, but at $11.99, I'll take what we have right now. All right, guys, so when we talk about kind of the heart and soul of the bike, the motor and battery, back here you've got a rear hub 500 watt nominal motor, which can peak at all the way up to 900 watts. It's also got 65 Newton meters of torque, which is a pretty respectable amount, and it does a pretty decent job on hills. Now, this isn't gonna fly up hills. It's not really designed to do that. It's not a super torquey bike or super powerful bike. It's a commuter. It's designed to get you to and from your destination. But if you live in an area with some hills, just know that it can do the job and get you up those hills. Now, the motor is activated by a cadence sensor. So when I start turning the pedals, that sensor, the magnet picks it up and it tells the motor to kick on. And when I stop pedaling, that tells the motor to kick off. Now, the cadence sensor takes about a half a turn before it engages, and then you have around 1/2 second to a full second of motor runoff before it stops when you stop pedaling. So when I get about a half of my turn in, the motor kicks on, pedal, 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 I'm getting my motor. When I stop pedaling, I have about a 1/2 second or so before it actually dies. Now, if that bothers you or that kind of makes you feel uneasy, one of the nice things about the brakes up here is as soon as you hit the brakes, it does do a motor kill switch or motor cutoff that instantly kills the power, so you don't have to wait on the cadence sensor. So a situation like emergency braking would obviously kill the motor. Now, the battery on here is advertised as 691 watts, or watt hours, excuse me, and that's a 48 volt battery with 14.4 amp hours. And it does come with a lock and key, and I'll show you how that comes out right now. All right, so the bike does come with 2 sets of keys. You just pop it in here on the side, turn the key, that will release the battery. You pull from the top and then lift up out. Plenty of room with this nice step-through frame. This weighs about 8.8 pounds and does have a 2-year warranty along with the whole bike. Now, this is a 48 volt battery, 14.4 amp hours, and 691 watt hours. Now, you're probably wondering about range on this. Now, they advertise you get up to 65 miles on PAS1, and then on PAS1 throttle only up to 58 miles. Now, we don't do throttle only tests, but I did run a range test on this and got 69 miles on PAS1, which is very respectable for a bike of this price point. And then on PAS5, so the max, I got 31 miles. So 69 and 31 on a pretty budget bike, that's a pretty awesome range number. Now, to put this back, you put the bottom in first, let the top go into place, and then you'll hear it click, and you're good to go. All right, guys, now when we talk about components on the Discover One Plus, it's got a pretty straightforward setup, but it has some also nice practical features. So starting back here, we have a 7-speed drivetrain with a derailleur that is a Shimano tourney. Now, the cassette is an 11 to 29, so about 319% range. Not a ton of range, but for a commuter bike with just varied average terrain, it's going to be just fine. The only time you're going to want more range in this back end cassette is when you have to worry about steeper hills, things like that, or you're really trying to pedal fast on flats or descents. But on a bike like this that's just made for cruising, commuting to work, I think this range is perfectly acceptable. Now, up front, you've got a 46 tooth chain ring, has a nice a nice chain guard here, and 170 millimeter alloy cranks, mated to plastic pedals, which are kind of a flat platform pedal that do have reflective strips on them for some extra visibility. Now, when it comes to braking, this bike does have hydraulic disc brakes. They are 2-piston calipers and 180 millimeter rotors, both front and back. Now, as far as branding goes, these are unbranded brakes, but like I said, I ride this bike all week and part of my testing before I do these reviews, and the brakes feel perfectly fine. They stop really well. If you lock up the brakes, there is a little bit of fishtailing in the rear wheel. It's nothing super bad, but you have a little bit of modularity as well. Nothing like a high-end brake's going to give you, but you have enough to work with where you can kind of control that stop the way you want. I just can't speak to longevity, but I think servicing these will be pretty straightforward, even with the unbranded name. These are becoming fairly commonplace to see more and more. Now, moving up to the saddle on this bike. So we've got a Velotric branded or unbranded if you want. They call it their comfort saddle. It's about 215 millimeters wide. It's got spring supports on the bottom. And I really found this to be super comfortable in general. Because of the geometry of the bike and the adjustable stem, you have a very upright riding position on this bike. And so your seat bones are just perfectly placed on here. You're not leaning forward with some of your weight on the handlebars and some on the seat. Almost all your weight is on the seat itself. And then up front here, that helps with the absorption in the front fork. And we can kind of talk about that now. Now, the front fork is also unbranded. It's a coil fork with 80 millimeters of travel and does have a lockout option on the side. So you can compress that 80 millimeters and then you can lock it out. And if you're doing something where you don't want that compression in your fork, you can always lock that out and put it back with a simple flick of the switch. Now, up here in the cockpit, we have an alloy handlebar with a width of 660 millimeters. Now, that's a bit on the shorter side, but I think it actually helps on this bike because it's kind of playful in its handling. It's easy to kind of dip into corners and get around. And with the Dutch Cruiser style, that 660 width, it's just a good handling bike, especially with the 2.5-inch wide tires. Now on both sides, you've got the unbranded hydraulic disc brake levers. Over here, you have your push throttle and your PAS control buttons, along with the power button for your Velotric display here in the center. Over on the right, you've got your bell and your Shimano 7-speed shifter. They are trigger shifters. And then on both ends, you've got rubber ergonomic lock-on grips. And lock-on is nice because they don't twist and fall off while you're riding them. Oh, and real quick, we have all of the cable management wrapped up in these ties and then eventually down into the frame where they're routed. But let's go ahead and take a closer look at the display. All right, guys, so the display, it's kind of a straightforward display. You have about a 3-inch display here. It is duotone, so just black and white basically with kind of digitized numbers. Now, this is the home screen and basically the only screen you're going to use on this bike. There's not a bunch of menus to jump into, but you've got all the basic data you need, like your speed here in miles an hour, your battery level, and a 5-bar meter, your trip odometer here, and then whatever level of assistance you're in while you're riding the bike, which is controlled with these buttons here on the left. Now, if you want some more info, they do give you the option to see some more information. That's helpful. So right now we're on odometer at 145 miles. And here you've got your average speed of 12.9 miles an hour. You've got max speed of 35.2. And we've got the current time, kcals of effort used riding the bike, and then a power and wattage output, which would be showing numbers if we were riding the bike and the motor was actually doing some work. And the current voltage at 48 volts. And the way I'm cycling through these is just hitting the power button quickly, because if I hold it, it'll turn the bike off. But just quick punches on this power button will cycle through those menus. Now, there's no app on this bike, so there's no kind of special pairing you can do or any kind of advanced features like GPS tracking, but that's kind of reserved for this value-packed, just kind of commuter bike at a simple price. Now, if you want something more punchy or something that's going to be more flashy and more connectivity, they do have like their Discover 2 model, which is going to be priced higher, but it's going to have all those extra comfort features and just some higher specs all around. But that kind of does it for the display. It's simple and it does the job. All right, guys, we're out here on the Velotric Discover 1 Plus. And when you get on this bike, you have a nice low step through height, so you can just easily step on, step off without really throwing your leg up over the bike, which is always nice. It always makes for just a quick dismount either side or getting on. The riding position is very upright, so I'm almost like sitting completely up, like I'm sitting in a chair at a dinner table or an event. You're just seated. You're not leaning in either direction. You're not back. You're not forward at all. It's not hybrid. You're just sitting on a comfortable seat, and that actually is a good point now to make, that the seat is actually really comfortable. Velotric has a thing for making comfortable seats. They're unbranded. There's nothing fancy in the name or style. They're just always comfortable, which is always nice. And for being a commuter like this, I'll take comfy any day. So been riding it quite a bit. I'm not even at a full charge anymore, but I wanted to talk about some just initial impressions here. Well, playing on that comfort factor, you have swept back bars and giving me that upright geometry. And these bars are not quite full cruiser bars like on a beach cruiser, kind of like a Dutch cruiser. If you guys have seen a Dutch style bike that are very popular for commuting in Europe, this is a very typical Dutch bar. And it just leads to a super upright and comfy riding position. But then you also have the front suspension fork, also unbranded and coil with 80 millimeters of travel. And it does have a lockout and some preload adjustment if you want to use that. As far as the tires, they're a slick commuter tire, and they make very little noise on the road, kind of as you would expect, especially with no knobbies on them. But they feel good. They have enough traction for kind of any typical commuting you would do. This is not something I would take, through some mud or some loose dirt, because you'll probably wipe out. But for just getting around on sidewalks and streets, these do a good job. Now, I don't know if you guys can hear it or not, but the motor is making a very subtle noise, not super loud, but it's there. It's kind of not a high pitch, kind of a lower pitch, but not very loud at all. And frankly, the wind noise and me talking kind of goes over it in my ears. Speaking of that motor, 500 watts, but it can peak at 900 watts, which is really solid. And I don't have the specs in front of me, but I'm pretty sure 65 Newton meters of torque. Speaking of, we got a little hill here, so let's bump up the PAS 5, blast the motor here, let you hear it going up the hill. So a little bit of a slowdown. That was a 9% grade. There's a sign right there we passed. And so at a 9% grade, it never went under 18 miles an hour. You did hear it slow just a bit, but not a whole lot. And that actually leads me to the cadence sensor on here. Let's kind of do a stop and go test with the cadence sensor. I'm gonna stop it after I pass these people so I don't have any awkward conversations. But let me get past them. Hey guys, hi. And we're clear. So I'm gonna stop up here, get on some flat ground, and we'll just see how long it takes the cadence sensor to activate. So a cadence sensor basically takes your input from your pedal, like when you start turning the rotation of the pedals, in other words, the cadence, and that tells the motor to kick on. So let's just go 3, 2, 1. Halfway down. Halfway through a full pedal stroke. So from the top of the stroke to the bottom is what it took for that to turn on. And as you can see, it gets going pretty well. Now the throttle on here is tied to some certain speeds. So in PAS1, the throttle won't go over about 14.5 from what I've seen. Let's see what it does here. Yeah, 14.5. And then PAS2 is around 17 or 18. And so on, about 3-4 miles an hour all the way up to 28. So let's actually see how long it takes us to get up over 20. And one thing to note, if you have PAS5 on, the throttle will take you all the way to 28. I would prefer to see this limited to 20 miles an hour on a throttle, but some of you guys will definitely like that, so just something to know. But let's PAS5, do a throttle test. Ready, set, go. So slow off the start, kind of a controlled acceleration, which fits the theme of a commuter. And now it's picking up a little bit. 17, 18, 19, and 20. But if I hung on to that, we'd be heading up to 26, 27, 28 miles an hour. Now the drivetrain on here is a Shimano Tourney 7-speed. And a 7-speed is a pretty, it's kind of a 7 speeds is enough to work with, but it's not a ton of range. Specifically, this has like an 11 to 29 rear cassette, so around 319% gear range. So limited in gear range, which would make, if you live in an area with a lot of hills, that's just gonna require you to use more pedal assist than a bike where you could really get into some better climbing gears and really make use of that drivetrain. Now 7 gears is still enough to get around and do most things, but the range is just a little limited. I'd like to see a little bit more range in the drivetrain. Maybe an 8 or 9 speed would be awesome. But really, when you think of the bike the way it is, its whole value proposition, kind of a smooth commuter for $11.99, it does a really good job. And speaking of that, let's talk components. So, specifically the brakes. The brakes are unbranded hydraulic disc brakes with 180 millimeter rotors and 2 piston calipers. I'm gonna get up to about 20, and let's just do a quick stop. All right, so we're at 20, and 3, 2, 1. Yeah, they feel good. There's a little bit of modulation, not a whole lot, nothing like a Magura or a TRP set of brakes, but enough to really have plenty of normal controlled stops, you know, at daily riding, and even the occasional short stop like we just had. So I locked up the brakes on that one. It stopped quicker, but I did notice, besides the squeal, there was a little bit of fishtail in the back tire. So that's something to be aware of. And that probably has a lot to do with the slick commuter tread pattern. But all in all, for what the bike is, $11.99, a commuter, step-through frame with a suspension fork and hydraulic disc brakes, 28 miles an hour, and basically 70 miles of range we got on my range test. It's just a really good value bike that has some fun colors and just kind of lets you get around without spending $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 on a really fancy bike, or even $2,000 for that matter. So yeah, I've enjoyed it, but let's go back and talk to Ben. He's the guy that's been wrenching on bikes for a long time, and he has some interesting thoughts. So let's go see what he thinks of this bike. All right, guys, we are back here with Ben, our in-house mechanic, and you know, this is a lot of y'all's favorite part where he kind of chats about his thoughts on today. It's going to be the Velotric Discover 1 Plus. kind of go through his pros and cons real quick. Ben, I'm going to get out of the frame, but before you do, I just want to say thank you to Feedback Sports. They've hooked us up with a lot of their gear, and I know I brag a lot and kind of talk a lot about this HD Pro rack, but it really is awesome. And like I said before, it makes me really bummed out when I go home to my garage and have that crappy cheap one, flimsy one. You guys may know what I'm talking about. Either way, if you like to work on your bikes and want to check out their stuff, there will be a link down below. Ben, I'm going to let you kind of take over the show. What are your thoughts on the Discover One Plus?
All right, thanks, Mike. Discover One Plus. All right, the likes are pretty easy to spot here. As usual, I'm always going to like a threadless fork and stem interface. And again, for two reasons, really. It's stiffer, it's lighter, you can find parts more easily and more readily available at most of your bike shops. Another thing that I like particularly about this stem is that it's threadless, yes, but it's also very adjustable. And even with that, it's very stiff. It's common to have an adjustable stem like this, but when you ride the bike, it'll feel flexy and kind of noodly in the front end. This is a really stiff setup, so way to go, Velotric. I think that thing's awesome. With the front end, I also like that it's an under-the-bar shifter and under-the-bar throttle on different sides. So as a rider, that just makes it real easy to focus on being able to use the brakes, use the shifter, and use the throttle. Very easy. It's basically just top-level ergonomics is what we're going for on that, so that's really awesome. This, the way the frame is built, this cavern right here, this piece, to me does two things. It houses the controller for the entire system, which as a mechanic, if you can access the controller very easily, that's a big time saver in the workshop, which then translates to, as a rider, if you take your bike to the shop and need to get it worked on, it takes less labor hours, which means less labor costs. That's a big deal too. With that, there's a lot of surface area that they're welding this down tube onto the frame, so that adds to the overall frame rigidity and stiffness of the ride feel. I think that's awesome. I'm always a big fan of plastic fenders. They're not as noisy, they're a lot lighter, they can take a hit, they don't dent, they don't stay dented. That's a big plus. They fit the tire real nice, great contour, so it looks great. One big point about this one is that it's a 7-speed drivetrain. Okay, why is that awesome? There's a lot of companies out there now are putting 10-speed, 11-speed, 12-speed, even 13-speed drivetrains on bikes. That's great, but on a bike like this, where it's going to be much more common for the rider to just use the motor, you get a 7-speed freewheel and a 7-speed chain. That just means there's more steel. More steel means longer life, less wear, less need for replacement. It just feels better. So I like the 7-speed drivetrain on a bike like this. You still get a good enough gear range, but just better overall longevity on the drivetrain. So I say big points on that. And you know what, when you take the wheel off on this one, because I've had to for flat tires a couple of times, it's very nice that the motor connection wire has a white paint strip where you connect it. I think that's a big deal. Sometimes if you're in the dark or in a dark workshop, it's hard to exactly match those pieces together. So it's just a little thing, but having the paint stripe join right there so you can just plug it in, boom, good to go. I really like that. And I've talked about this on other bikes, but I really like the kickstand placement on this bike, backed by the rear axle. So if in any case you need to back the bike up to park it, you have the pedals will be able to rotate, and not have any problem at all getting in the way of the kickstand.
Nice, man. What kind of things would you improve on something like this?
This one, I'm being picky. I do like this bike for a lot of things. One thing that I do wish that they would do differently, and they're not the only company that's doing this, this is an integrated headlight mount into the stem face plate. It sure does look great out of the box. It works well. Aesthetically, again, super nice to look at. However, how readily available is that light mount? I don't know. If it breaks, if it cracks, if it comes off, something like that, you lose a screw. It seems as though it'll just take a few more days to get a hold of Velotric, which probably has awesome customer service, but it just would be nice if this was something that just clamped around the handlebar and was potentially easier to find. It's just me being picky, but it's one of those things. I always like a 2-piece chainring setup, so that this is just a 1-piece stamped. If ever you bend the chainring, you wear the teeth out, something like that, it's going to be a little more costly to replace, maybe not as easy to find either. So I think a 2-piece chainring would be an advantage on this. And then what I've always talked about and hope that we can change in the industry, especially with e-bikes, is a more hollow or oversized bottom bracket spindle. There again, for a bigger rider or somebody who likes to ride aggressively, these really old style square taper bottom bracket spindles are just that. They're just really old, kind of antiquated. It's just time to step up to a more standard ISIS style or even the Shimano style, whichever one they choose, they just work better. These are plastic pedals. okay, they're light, but then also they're not very durable. You can ride through, meaning you'll pedal, 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 and the bearings through the spindle may burn through this thing sooner than a nice pair of aluminum pedals. And even to that point, if you're transporting the bike, maybe you crash or you fall down, plastic pedals crack. You crack these pedals, time for replacements. Not a big deal, but it would just last longer, be better if they were aluminum bodied. The last thing that I'll mention is on the rear fender here for the rear light, the wire from the battery goes inside the fender on the inside. So as a rider, what that might mean is if you're cruising along, just having the time of your life, you pick up a stick or a rock, it sticks in the tire and goes into the fender. There is a chance, I'm not saying it's always going to happen, but there is a chance that that debris will then get into the fender and cut that light wire. Is it a big deal? I sort of think so, because then to replace that, fender comes off or wheel comes out, and then you've got to drag a new wire to the controller. To me, it seems as though the wire would be just as easy to drag on the outside of the fender, where it would be free from getting any kind of debris cut or messing up that wire. That's about all I've got with this bike, Mike.
Awesome, man. Once again, thank you for your time, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right, thank you.
All right, guys, so let's kind of sum up our thoughts on the Velotric Discover 1 Plus. So let's just remember what it is and what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a value-driven commuter e-bike, and I think it does that job perfectly well. And it's even got some upgraded perks and practical features that everyday commuters are going to really like to have. Things like including the free rear rack, fenders front and back to keep water from splashing up on you, smooth rolling tires, adjustable stem, and even a front suspension fork with front and rear lighting that includes a brake light. I just think it's a really solid package for the price. And if you're looking for a commuter e-bike, no frills package that gets the job done and is pretty comfy, this should definitely be on your short list to take a look. Now, if you want something more fancy or you like more features like app connectivity and ride tracking and just higher spec all around, check out Velotric's Discover 2, which we've also done a review on, and that has kind of a bump in every direction in spec, but also in price. So you kind of got different flavors to work with Velotric when it comes to their commuting bikes. Now, if you have any questions that I didn't cover or want to make a comment, just drop it down below, and I try to respond to everybody best I can. And if you haven't done so already, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next review.